Okay. So let's see. Can you hear me okay? If you can just type in the chat window here, I will share my screen and we'll go look at what everybody did. Okay, let's present. Let me share my screen here. Okay, so I am not I'm not able to see that. Google Hangouts is a kind of unusual one, but you should be able to see the postcards here. I have the class list pulled up. So let's see. If you're not able to see, just let me know. All right. So I just wanted to say welcome again for our second chat here, and this is a good time to see if you have any questions. But I thought we could look at what everybody did for week one. I thought they were really creative and fun. And then as a reminder, you'll be able to revise these as we get towards the end of the class. So anything that you learn during class, it's a good time to go back and kind of use those skills to redo that. So all right. We have this one here, Wakaba. So this is really fun, interesting design. I'm glad to see some of the techniques that I was showing you guys in the last critique were used. And so I think it's just really simple and clean, good use of the colors there and the collage of the different effects. And like I said, with Photoshop, Photoshop and Illustrator are complementary to each other, and they're also complementary when you're using InDesign. But those two programs, you can also combine them in interesting ways. So you can import, which maybe we can talk about in upcoming weeks. You can import elements from Illustrator into design, from Illustrator into Photoshop. And that creates some interesting effects to go back and forth like that too. All right, so this one looks great. And then the type is interesting. I would say you can always play with type. You can get very creative with it. You can rotate it. You can make it large. You can overlap it. And the one thing we can look at with design is, we're going to talk a little bit about type here coming up, is whether or not it needs to be readable or legible. Now that depends on what you're trying to do. If you're trying to be creative and artistic with it, you can certainly play with that. You don't have to abide by those rules. If you're doing something where you want the type to be read, then we want to make sure we focus on things like contrast, making sure that we're able to see the type against the background, that it doesn't get lost. So it just depends, but it's a good start, and it might be something in the upcoming one you want to play with there. All right, so I'm going to scroll down. Hopefully I can see everybody's in the list here. All right, UN, interesting design. This is really fun. The image is great. It looks like you collage the two together. So certainly you have some experience using Photoshop, and that's really fun. And the thing with Photoshop that works well, I mentioned before, is that sense of depth. So you can use Photoshop to create something that's very realistic looking, kind of like you have here, where you have the image sitting on the steps and it looks very realistic, and then you have the background. That's a fun way to integrate the type. And that's one way. The other way is to do it very surrealistic, where you are doing things based on sizes. So the object that's closest to the viewer would be large, even if in real life it's small. And then objects in the middle ground and the background would get smaller. And that's another way. That can be really fun, is to do it more surrealistically. But this is super creative, and the colors all work. The type works well. That's really interesting. So good job on that one. All right. So we have this one here. So good job. Very creative imagery, and also a good composition, good hierarchy. So the portrait is large in the foreground. That works really well. And then doing the the sort of vector images in the background. I don't know if these are vectors. I think they probably are. And this is a fun way to combine something that's a raster. Remember we were saying raster images are composed of pixels, and they're so with raster images you can move the pixels like in Photoshop. You can move them, you can colorize them, you can erase them. But the vectors, those are made from points and lines, and you could scale vectors to any size and they never lose quality. So that's kind of one of the unique aspects of a vector. But putting them together is really fun. And so again, maybe we can play with that in upcoming weeks. But this is great. And you've integrated the type, Trang, in a very creative way. We're able to still read it, but it's also unique in the way that it fits together. So that's working really well, and some nice lighting on that. I don't know if it's part of the image, but that works really well with the background. So good effort on that. Okay, let me scroll down. And if I'm missing somebody in the list for some reason, I'm going to go back up and make sure that I'm not missing anybody in that list. Okay. So Taylor, good job. We have a nice image, and then again some vectors sort of integrated around it creatively, sort of integrating the image and then some abstract vectors along the way, and then the type is in a place where it's certainly readable. And that works, that kind of merges the best of both worlds there, is playing with those images and the type. So another a really interesting technique is you can use the eyedropper in Photoshop, and let's say we bring in some vectors to Photoshop, or any image. You can use the eyedropper to sample a color from part of the image, and you can use it in your composition. I think I may have shown that. But if not, I can show that too. So it's, and we're not using color for this week's, so in upcoming weeks, but you can sample a color. So like for example, the yellow here, you could always sample that and apply that to some of the vectors, and that kind of helps keep everything unified when you're using some of those same colors together. But this is really nice, and it's great to see that the artwork in the background also. So good job with that. All right, so Melanie, nice. All right, so we have the photograph, and again some more combined vectors on top. The black and the white approach is really interesting here, and kind of being able to see the image in the background and watch that kind of pop through. These are interesting, and I could even imagine some of the parts of the tree here, or the organic shape, you could even use that as a mask where the photograph could show through parts of it. And you can draw a mask and turn a mask on like we were playing with, where just parts are kind of peeking through in pieces of the vector there. But right now this is really unusual and creative effect. And then again we can see the type on top of it. And that might be a place too as you move forward in the upcoming weeks to play with the typography and play with maybe making some of the words larger, or making that kind of even more creative than what it is right now into as part of the image. That could be very interesting. Nice work on that one. All right, so Marie-Eve, this is the image. So I know we've been talking about the image, and I asked you, you had questions about the resolution on it. And we talked a little bit in that first chat about the resolution when I showed it. So it's always good when you're working in Photoshop to create something at the highest resolution possible, because you're going to have more flexibility. Like I said, if you need it for print, you're going to have it ready for print if it's at 300, or you're going to have it for digital if it's at 72. So I think what I saw, Maria, was that you created it at 72, which is okay for this assignment, but it won't, it's going to be fairly small when you see it on the screen. If it was at 300, you could export different versions of it at different sizes and resolutions. So that might be some of the issue, but overall the combination of the images is very creative. And I wasn't sure, I didn't see any type, so I wasn't sure if you had put some type on there and I was missing it. But this is definitely a good start. So if you have that file that we've been talking about, I'll be happy to take a look at that and see what the resolution might look like in the source file, and that would be helpful. But nice work. Those are the great texture and effects playing with that feathering. And so this technique too, the feathering one, whoops, that you can use is good for things that are dreamlike. You want to combine them and kind of merge them where they don't have solid edges. That can be a great approach to use. If you need solid edges for something, then you want to make sure the feathering is turned off. But this is working well for the dream, kind of a dreamlike effect that's happening there. So nice work on that one. All right, let me head down here. So we have Mara. This is great. So we have a couple images being combined creatively, and that's working well, and a good place for the typography also. So both of them are merged together in a nice way where we can still read the type, and we're able to see the composition has that sense of depth where you have kind of a large foreground, something in the middle ground, something in the background. Those are all working well. And same thing, as we go forward, it might be a nice opportunity to play with type or play with some of the words larger or smaller or bolder so they come out. And then if you wanted to apply color, playing with that eyedropper to get that to apply to type could work well. So nice job on that. Okay, so hand. Nice. Okay, so here's yours. And there's that's really creative. It looks like there's textile in the background, like a fabric. And I'm going to assume this is your illustration. So that's really beautiful. And so you have kind of this nice combination. And they look like they're vectors, vector elements, but it could also be raster. I'd have to see the source file here. But these are great. This is a great integration of those, and the patterns are working together nicely. And so that it has this interesting sense. Your illustration almost feels like the Bauhaus or constructivist ideas here, but those are interesting, integrating with the background design here. So very nice. And you have some type, which is integrated, and you're playing with it in a creative sort of way. So nice job strategically putting it in that area where we can still read it. So this is great. And I would say, if you do your second version later on, and if you wanted to still play with that image, it's such a beautiful one that that could still be fun to kind of integrate that same image, maybe partially bleed it off the edge, make it large. And so bleeds, for everybody, just a reminder, when you bleed something off, it's essentially running it off the edge, kind of like we have here. And bleeds are really fun for compositions where you can take things partially off of it. So this is a great job on that one. Very creative. All right, let me scroll down here. So Darcy, nice work. So you're collaging the image. It looks like it's been masked off really well. And with those masks that you play with, when you're, I showed a little bit of using the pen tool last week, but the pen tool, even if you don't do a perfect mask on something the first time, you can always come back and use the paintbrushes or use some other tool to clean it up. So, if you have something that's really complex and you're trying to use the pen tool to draw around it to create a mask, you don't have to be extremely careful, because you can always come back and it's very forgiving. You can kind of clean it up, like I said, using a pencil or a paintbrush on the mask. But good job. You have a hierarchy here. You're large in the foreground. We have the image in the background, and then the pattern or the texture here in the middle ground. That could be fun to play with too, that pattern. And it's nice because it has a layered effect, but it could be fun. I don't know if you played with some of those layer blending mode effects that I showed. Seeing what happens when you toggle some of those, because I think that texture could kind of drop back and maybe get a little bit more subtle, but merge itself with like the trees. You could do a number of different interesting effects with that. I would say that could be interesting to drop that down, just so that we can read some of the type on top of it. You can read it now, but it's, this demands your attention a little bit more than the type. So depending on where you wanted that to fall, I think you could play with some of those patterns and play with dropping them back. But this is a good composition, very asymmetrical, and that's working well. So nice job. All right, let's scroll down here. So we have Daniel. All right, very creative image composition. So you did a larger version, which is fine. And so talking about that, if you do create it at 300, you'll have access to the larger version versus just the small one here. So that's nice to see. But great play with the techniques here, the photographic techniques, the color effects, collaging the image of yourself laying down against the background, and also the type still stands out well, and the colors are working really well. So this is super creative. I'm not really sure what you're going to do with your second one. I could do another photograph of yourself again, maybe your face peeking out from the corner, or you could add some other just your feet or something in the composition could be fun to play with. But that alone is creative. And so half the battle with Photoshop is finding the right images or taking the right images, and then before you even collage those. So fun job on that one. All right, Cody. So we have a good sense of layering in this one here. Good selection of images. You have that background composition. It looks like you dropped it back a lot so that we can see those older photographs on the front. And that's working. We have drop shadows. Drop shadows are fun. You can play with those inside the layer styles. They allow you to create that sense of depth. We do have to be careful with drop shadows, though. I tend to think they're overused in a lot of sense. Here they work really well, but sometimes you'll see a lot of those layer styles, they're overused, and when you overuse too many at the same time, it can look a little bit cliche or overused. But when they're used right, like here, I think they work pretty well to create that sense of depth. So those are working nicely. And then we have the type at the top, which is pretty readable. It looks a little bit like it's pixelated. It might just be my view here that I'm looking at. If you have any trouble, that when you type the type, there's an option to set it to sharp, or I think there's a couple different options to set your type so it's not pixelated. So I'm not really sure. Sometimes that can indicate that there's a problem with the font or the display, or maybe it's just my view, but it's in a very readable spot right now. So I would say, it's working well. You could just even get more creative with that, or putting some of the words behind the photographs, really playing with the texture or the layering effect there could be fun. So feels very like a dreamlike state. So that's interesting. Nice work. All right, let me head down here a little bit. Okay, so we have Christina. Good. So we have multiple images collaged, and that's, this is great. I actually see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Maybe I'm missing one, but it looks like 5. And you can see you get some really interesting effects when you start to play with those layer effects, those color effects. Sometimes we can just get lost in Photoshop and all the options that it offers here. But this is good because you're playing with a sense of asymmetry. We have the majority of images over here on the right, and then we have some empty space, which kind of gives the eye rest, so we can go back and forth between the two, and that's really nice. And then some creative type. So one side thing, I don't know how much experience everybody has with type in the course so far, and it's fun. It is, it's free. You're free to break the rules and play with it. I just want to make sure there's one aspect of type. If we're dealing with readability, it's kind of one that oftentimes you'll see is the stacking of letters. So what I want you to be aware of, so when we learn to read in Western culture, we go from left to right, and our eyes actually skim the tops of the letter forms, and our brain assembles the word. They're like the letters are little train cars. And so we're not actually reading letter by letter. Our brain just kind of sees it like a puzzle and puts it together. So when we stack it vertically, the brain cannot read quickly. And so our brain has to go one at a time and then reassemble it in our head, which takes longer. And it's not that you can't do that, it's just something everybody should be aware of, is that that stacking effect changes the way we read, and it can take quite a bit longer. So a lot of times what people recommend is that you write the word out like you would and then just rotate it. So you would rotate it and read it from bottom to kind of turn your head and rotate it so you can read it from bottom to top, or vice versa. And that helps with some of the readability. But this is great. Really nice sense of depth in the composition, use of color and effects. So good job. All right, so Ashley, nice work here. We have the use of the mask, right? And you said the country of Hungary, and then putting the images inside of there. That's really fun. I've seen that a lot. I've seen that sort of sense of a mask, which works really well. And then inside of here, you're playing with collaging them, some elements together. What I'll see is people will ghost things together inside those masks. So maybe you'll see the silhouette of a lion, and then inside the lion there will be other images layered inside that mask, where they're using the lion's head or whatever it happens to be. So this is a really fun technique to play with. And the composition itself is very clean and empty, and yet we have a lot of stuff going on inside the mask. So that's really fun. I wasn't sure if you intended on type there. It could be fun to add some typography. I'm not sure if you'd want to add it out here or inside there, but that could also be a good aspect to look at. So nice work on there. All right, so Allie, so you have a bigger version here, which is good. So it looks like you have a bigger version. Okay, so just reading some of your type here. Nice. There's an interesting image, and then it looks like you're being strategic about adding type around it and vector elements. There's some of the nice vectors applied on top of it, and then being strategic about where you add type. So I should note too, with Photoshop, if you're trying to create a collage and then you have to position type on top of it, and let's assume the type has to be readable, there's a couple of ways you can approach that. Sometimes you'll find yourself in a boat where the image is completely, there's no room for type, right? I mean, if you put type on top, you can't read it, and you have to find a position to do that. So there's a lot of tricks we can use. Sometimes what I'll use is a gradient. I'll apply a dark gradient over part of the image. So let's say I wanted to put type, I don't know, in this corner where it's more complicated. I could run a gradient color, like a darker color, just up part way, and then I would have a surface to put type on top of. Sometimes we'll kind of use the magic wand tool, select an area and feather it, and then apply a darker gradient and put type on top. So there's lots of different techniques, but the best thing to do is always adjust your background image, not the type. So sometimes you'll see people, they'll take the type and they'll say, I can't read it, so I have to put an outline around the letters, a stroke or a drop shadow, and anything that you add to type, it adds a lot of noise without a lot of value. So rather than adding anything to type, to try to make it more readable, it's better to always adjust your background. So make it darker, make it lighter, like I said, add a subtle gradient to part of it, or a subtle darkness, or lightness, whatever you're trying to do, and then put your type on top of there. But that's really creative. It's got that nice sense of shape and asymmetry here happening. So good effort there. All right, and it looks like we have another version of that. So you added some to resolve some of that. You put a shape on top of it, and that could work too. That feels very elegant also, although we lose part of the image. So like I was just saying, it's challenges of trying to put type on top of an image. This works. You could also change the opacity of the box behind it and make it a little bit lighter so that it sits on top of the background, and so we can kind of see through. But this is working fairly well. All right, so hopefully I didn't miss anybody. I'm just going to go back through the list. If I missed you, I'm sorry, and you will see feedback in the grade book, so just keep a note of that. Let me just head back up, make sure that nobody had just a link in there. I think I showed you guys, I posted how to attach an image to your post. There's a little image icon and that'll insert it directly into your post so you don't have to attach it as just a link. And I think everybody did that very successfully here as we go through. Let me just go to the top. Yeah, I think we caught everybody. But again, if we didn't for some reason, feel free to let me know. All right, let me just jump on over. So this week we were doing the graphic design, some of the principles and showing those, playing with Illustrator and showing those. And I think from what I'm seeing, everybody feels, you know, so far you guys are looking really comfortable with just Photoshop and playing with some of the tools and things like that. So what I am going to do here is open up my Illustrator window a little bit so you can see that. I was playing with one already, but I'm going to just start a new file here. Okay, so I'm in Illustrator. Let me just go to File, New. And the composition you're aiming for is 6 by 6. So you can do a 6 inch by 6 inch. You have to kind of, you have to put in the height and the width here. So I'm going to create that. It'll give you a square. I always recommend view your rulers. So view rulers, show your rulers, so that you're able to see what you're doing in Illustrator. So remember, Illustrator is that vector program, and it's the things are created with the points and the lines, so they're scalable. They also can be, when you have a vector image, it can be sized to any size and it will never lose quality. So things like logos, which we'll get into towards the end of the term, those are, you want to do those as vectors. If you can imagine a logo, for example, it might need to sit on a business card or on a website, but then maybe it needs to be the size of a building or the size of a billboard. And so if it's vector, then it'll always scale. It'll always be beautiful quality. And you never have to worry about resolution. So I just wanted to make a note of that. All right, so I have my square, and you know, there's really, it's fairly simple, I think, this week with the tools that you're using. Here's the tool palette. If you're looking for anything in your Adobe programs, they're under the window. Window has pretty much everything that you need when you're looking for a palette and you don't have it. So all that I really have up this week is I have my layers, I have my the one called the Pathfinder, which is really helpful, so you want to have that up. And then I have my colors, which are set up for print right now. You can also do just grayscale if you want this week. CMYK is for print, so it's kind of a nice default. You can always convert things to other palettes later. All right, so I have my tools palette up also, and remember I have over here on the palette, the foreground color is your fill, the background color is your stroke. You can flip those at any time. If you don't want a color applied to one of those, the stroke or the fill, you can click on it and hit the box that has the red X through it or red line, and it will completely turn it off. So for example, I just want shape colors. I don't want any outlines with this assignment. I don't want to apply any strokes to anything. I just want to be using shapes only. So I'm going to just have the fill here. All right, so I'm going to use the shape tool. It's right here. You have a number of shapes you can use. I'm going to just use a rectangle. All right. Oops, I'm getting some feedback here. Let me just mute. Okay, thanks. I was getting a little bit of feedback. All right, so I'm going to draw. I'm going to do a first of all, I'm going to use a white background as of right now. So I'm going to keep this white. So you can keep it. The page is by default white in the background, or if you wanted to draw a box to ensure that it stays white, you can do that also. So I'm just going to leave it the composition white for now, and I'm going to draw some black shapes on top of it. So I have my square tool. Now in Adobe, if you hold your shift key down, it will give you a proportional shape, or if you're trying to scale something, you want to hold your shift key down always. It's your best friend because it will allow you to proportionally scale it. I'm going to show you an example using type. Now, we can't use type for this assignment, but I'm just going to use some type right at the moment because I want to show you why that is so very, very important. So I have this word type, right? Now, if I just go in Illustrator and I don't hold my shift key down and I try to scale something, oh, actually, this isn't a good example. Well, hang on one second. I have to do something to this first so you can see this. All right, let's say I have some type or an image. We'll just pretend this is an image, but I go to the corner without my shift key down and I try to scale it. You'll notice I'm trying to be accurate about scaling it, but what happened was when I was scaling it without the shift key, I slightly distorted it because you can't, it's hard to be super perfect when you're doing it by hand. You're not holding the shift key down, so you get some slight distortion happening. And this really, you can see this with type, but you could also see it with images. So if I try to scale this block, I'm trying to do it right, but I'm kind of not. It's a rectangle. So again, no matter what you're trying to scale, if you hold that shift key down now, right, no matter what size it is, it will be perfect. Okay, so use that as your best friend. So I have this shape. I'm going to kind of scale it. Now here's a trick. If you create a shape and you want to create a duplicate of the shape, which speeds things along enormously, you just hold your Option key and you drag away from it and you get another copy of it. You can also hold your Option and Shift and Option Shift, and I can drag one right to the side, or I can drag one perfectly below it, and that's the Option and Shift together, because Shift will move it perfectly up or down, left or right. So you can do both of those together and you will get a perfect alignment. All right, let me see here. Uh-huh.
I don't see the screen you're talking about.
Oh, you don't see it? Okay.
I only see the backboard.
Okay, let me try to change my screen now. Oops, let me see if... All right, good to know. Hang on one second. Okay. Oh, there we are. Gosh, we're having audio here too. All right. So I created that 6x6 file here. I'm getting some feedback. And I created the shape. And so when I drew it, here, let me draw it again. I drew a square. Remember that if I hold my shift key down, I can get it to proportionally scale here. Oops. Okay. If you can't hear me, Hens, just, sorry, send me another little chat thing. Oh, here, you were sending it to me and I didn't see it there. Okay, so if you can't see it or hear me, just, yeah, send me another note. Sorry, we're trying to get multiple things going. I have the recording going and the Google Hangouts going. Unfortunately, they don't work together. We're doing it at the same time. So if you miss anything, by the way, Hen, in this, it'll be in the recording also. So, all right, so we have some shapes. I was scaling it. And the thing I was showing before was that you can hold your Option and your Option key down as you click on a shape, and you can drag away and you get a duplicate of it. So this will speed things along. If you want to make multiples of something, you just hold your Option key down and you can drag as many as you want. The other thing you can do is, if you want to create a multiple and you want it to be precisely to the left, right, top, or bottom, you can do Option and then Shift. Okay, so Option first, actually, and then when you're holding the Option key and you're dragging, hold the Shift key down. It's kind of a funny little keyboard thing, but you can drag it directly in a left or right or top or bottom position. So just hold your Option first, click, and then hold Shift, and you can get things to kind of go more precisely aligned here. Okay, your keyboard's also helpful if you use your arrow keys. If you're finding that it's hard to align things, you click on a shape, just use your arrow keys to get them aligned. You can also drag any guidelines out that you want from here, from the top, to get those to kind of align elements in the composition. All right, so I can drag some shapes. Again, I'm going to hold my Option key, drag a shape, and I hold my Shift key down, and I get that nice proportional scale that happens. So I really can play with any kind of shapes that I want here. When you're doing your principles, your graphic design principles, one of them is figure ground. Now, figure ground is going to work on if you do a reversed approach versus the dark on light. The other principles are going to work typically best if you do the dark shapes on a light background. Now, some people do them all with a dark background. What'll happen is they still work, but then they're all showing figure ground. So let me give you an example. So this is if I was playing with some of the different principles. Let me do a dark background. So I'm going to draw a square to cover the whole background right here. Okay, so I'm going to make it black. And remember that even though I'm running things off the edge, when I go to save this as a PDF, the PDF will automatically cut off anything that's hanging over the edge. So you can do bleeds, you can have objects hanging off, but when you save that as a PDF, it will automatically crop for you beautifully. So don't worry about that. And then make sure you always save your source files to your source Illustrator or your source PSD files. I'm just going to make sure you can see. Can you see and hear me? Just want to make sure that I'm not endlessly talking again without that. All right. So let me put some white shapes on top. I'm going to draw some white shapes. I'm going to draw a circle. Good. Okay. I'm going to draw a circle here with the ellipse tool. And same idea, hold your Shift key down. So I'm going to draw a circle. And if I'm playing with figure ground relationships, right, it's good to kind of bleed some of them off. So I'm just going to kind of make another one, hold my Shift key down, whatever my composition happens to be here. All right, so I'm going to do some of this. So what you'll notice is that when we're dealing with figure ground, right, we're looking at both the shape of the darks, and the shape of the lights. And so you want to be able to see both simultaneously. And that's why doing it this way, doing a reversed background and white shapes on top, is going to give you the best effect for your figure ground one. If you choose to do that for all of them, you'll still get the other principles. You'll still be able to view them, but then they'll also be showing as figure ground because of that reversal of shape. So I just want to put that out there. That's something to think about. All right, let me delete everything here. I want to do one more thing. I had some people were asking me about how to create some knockout shapes. Okay, so I want to show you something. Somebody was asking me about creating a donut, and so a shape that's a circle with a hole knocked out of it. And that's a popular thing that you may need to do. So I'm going to draw a circle. Okay, and let's say I want to create that donut shape, and it has nothing in the center. It looks like it has nothing in the center. So I'm going to draw a color shape first. I'm going to create a duplicate of it, scale it down, and I'm going to make this one white and put this in the center. Okay, so I'm going to scale it down a little bit more. And if I want to get something precise, again, the keyboard is great. I can kind of get that into position. So I have this donut shape, but if I was needing to put this needing it to be a vector, I don't want the center to be white. I want to see through it. I want to just have the outer shape be present. So I'm going to select both of them. And over here on Pathfinder in the lower left hand corner, you can click on the divide option. That's one of them. It will merge them together. Okay, and then what I can do is select my second direct selection tool here. I can click on the shape in the center and delete it. And so what I'm left with when I click on it is simply just the donut shape where the center is missing. If that's hard to see, what I can do is put something behind it so you're able to see the difference here. Let me just draw a rectangle. I'm just going to send this to back. So now you can see that this is just a donut shape, and that works with any kind of a shape. If I drew a square or a shape and I wanted to knock out a part of it, so maybe I'll draw this dark shape, and then I want to put a circle to knock out a corner of it. Okay, I want to knock out just a corner of that. So you have to kind of visualize how the shapes intersect and how they fit together. So I have a circle. I want to knock out like a portion of the square. I select both of them. I can use that divide Pathfinder tool. Go to my direct selection arrow, and I can click on the object and delete it. I can click on the white pieces. They become kind of merged, and then you can separate them and delete them, and you're left with just that puzzle piece that you wanted. So as you're building something, if you think about how those shapes intersect and how you can kind of merge them and delete portions of them, you can get some very interesting types of shapes. Okay, so it's very simple. I would say just focus on those are the only tools you'll need this week to play with. Maybe focus on those compositions and really reflecting some of those ideas clearly in the compositions that you create. Okay, so that is all I have for today. Do you have any other questions? Or let me turn your your audio back on here. Let's see if we can unmute you, or maybe you need to unmute yourself. I'm not sure. Let's see. Oh well, I think you can unmute yourself, or if you just want to type in the chat window, either's fine. But any other questions or anything I can answer for you? Okay. All right. Well, that's it, and I would say have a good rest of your day, and I will. I'm looking forward to seeing those compositions come to life this week. All right. All right. I'll see you in class. Goodbye.